Hello everybody. So I know for a channel which mainly features web scraping, this is a strange title for a video. However, I think it's important to discuss why it's not always a good idea to spend 100% of your time doing web scraping. Now let's consider why. Bear in mind, this is my opinion and everybody has an opinion. So if you disagree, then please comment. So in this video, we're going to look at Kaggle, which I've not mentioned before, but I expect many of you are familiar with. If not, then you may like what I've got to show. And also, the next thing I'm going to show is a site called Peltarion, which if you're considering doing some machine learning or you want to know more about it, even if you don't want to become a professional at it, then it's always a good idea to know what it can and can't do. And it's apart from anything, it will give you some inspiration. So yeah, we'll look at that as well. So why am I doing this video? Well, it's all about time. We've all only got so much time. I suspect many of you are familiar with the 10,000 hour rule, which is not really a rule, but it's an ideology that when you put in 10,000 hours practicing something, you become a master at it. So if you're given 10,000 hours, what do you spend it on? What do you learn? And spend 10,000 hours just doing web scraping is probably not a great idea. And yeah, I'll explain why. So if you consider a standard web scraping project, much of the time will be spent doing things which are unique to that site. And that's never going to be of value to you again in the future. That's why if you saw my recent eBay API video, that actually could be of value going forwards, because obviously eBay is such a, and also YouTube, eBay or YouTube API, that's something that for the next year or 5 years or 10 years, there's always going to be eBay, there's always going to be YouTube. So having knowledge of their API, that is transferable and going forwards. Whereas with a typical web scraping project, for instance, a foreign real estate site, you could spend probably over half the time identifying selectors and trying to understand the logic so that you can extract the data. And obviously the other big chunk of time will be testing, going back, trying different selectors, testing again. The amount of time you spend coding is actually probably, or writing new code, because obviously most of the time you're repeating the same old stuff from Scrapy, import, crawler process and all that. So yeah, learning. So typically on a web scraping project, I would say the minority of the time you're actually learning something new, something useful new. Obviously, a lot of the stuff you're learning specific to the site is new, but that's not useful. It's not useful because you're only going to use it once. So if you applied this ratio to your 10,000 hours, probably 6,000 of your hours would be spent looking at a website which is of no use to you even tomorrow or the next day, let alone in a year or 2 or 5 years time. And typically the 10,000 hours is, I believe it's 90 minutes a day for 20 years. So last thing you want to be doing is wasting time or spending time trying to understand someone else's website that you're never going to need to look at again. So what I'm going to look at next is we'll briefly look at Kaggle, and I'll introduce you to that if you're not familiar with it. And then we'll look at quite a common usage really, and a useful thing to be able to do is to work with the data once you've extracted it. I'm going to show you a site called Peltarion. We're going to just have a look around it. We're going to look at the services they offer with a view to getting some inspiration, and also with a view to whether it would actually be more viable to use this service rather than your own machine learning. And we can look at their tutorial and yeah, just have a good look around. So Peltarion, and then after that we'll just consider why, if you can read, yeah, scale, any number of sites, any speed, billions of pages. So just to kind of sum up, we'll look at why It's unlikely, depending on whether you're running your own business, whether you're a freelancer. Um, we'll look at why you won't ever be able to compete with companies like this on scale and really also on accuracy, because the AI which they will be using is just beyond what you can do using BeautifulSoup or Scrapy or anything similar to that. So then we will end in a big black void. No, we won't. Let's begin. So let's look firstly at Kaggle. Okay, so as you gather, the focus of this video really is looking at other avenues to explore for your career, for your all-round knowledge, expanding your knowledge, and where to focus your time, and also seeking inspiration from larger companies and looking at how you can do how and where you can get tutorials and learn free of charge. That's always good. So I've often found actually that Udemy or some of those tutorials are not the best way to learn. So anyway, Kaggle we've got here. Kaggle, I believe, is part of Google, but there's no kind of hard sell going on here. So firstly, you have to sign in, or you can sign in, and then it logs your progress on the tutorials that you do. So also they have competitions. I don't know, some of them even offer money, which a couple of videos I've watched recently, one by Code Monkey King, and also there was a TED talk, talks about not following your passion, because your passion will change, but do something which is of value. And obviously if you get more skilled in machine learning, for instance, and then you can look at, you know, diseases in apple trees, or there's that natural language processing with disaster tweets. Anyway, yeah, there's loads of competitions there, and yeah, some of them are very serious and very worthwhile. Obviously, they are. So, data sets. If you're molecular transition, fitness, followers, academic word list. So heart attack analysis, world happiness, stroke prediction, vaccine myths. So there's a lot of very worthwhile stuff going on here. So you can get data sets, and some of them are huge. I mean, 7 gigabytes. You can get a CSV, which is 240 kilobytes, 63 kilobytes. So whatever size data set you want, you can get from here. So if we click on new academic word list and download, so that's available as a CSV. There. And the good thing about it, it's got some some foreign characters which you will then need to pass. So yeah, a good source for data sets, CSVs, so on. Now code, communities, courses. You get the idea. You can look at this yourself. So courses, intro to machine learning and pandas. So to be honest, whether you want to or not, having some knowledge of pandas is going to help you in the long term, particularly if you're working with anybody who asks for a CSV or gives you a CSV. Pandas, in actual fact, rather than writing a for loop in Python, Pandas is built on top of NumPy, which runs in C, so it's compiled, so it runs faster. So if you want to do things on a large scale with Python, don't do big for loops. There's videos out there showing the timings of them. So if you want to do things quickly and on a large scale, obviously Pandas is basically a two-dimensional array, which is much quicker, and it's indexed, so it's much quicker than doing a for loop in Python. That's all I'm going to say. So yeah, you see I've done some tutorials. If we look at let's look at indexing and slicing. So that's quite a common thing to do to start with and reviews. So you just look at the data frame, then just look at how to slice by country, the first row showing the country column, and then using the difference between using iLock and using lock, manipulating the index. So then you set the title, resetting the index, then the difference between lock and iLock, it explains that, which obviously yeah, can catch you out. But so these courses, and then once you've completed them, so let's just go back up to the top. This was the introduction, and this is kind of the tutorial. But when you get to the bottom, you can then start the exercise. So the exercise basically gives you a scenario, and yeah, it takes a while to load. And it loads this first cell, and it loads some stuff which is specific to Kaggle. It's kind of loading the background stuff, which makes it run. And yeah, it gives you hints and solutions. So your code goes here. So it just wants to get the description column from the reviews data frame and set it to the variable DSC. And then if you click on here, you can run it, and it will check your code. So it's like Jupyter Notebook, but there's it checks your work for you, and it sets you challenges. So really, really useful if you're trying to learn pandas and or other types of things such as machine learning. Yeah, and just watch out. If you're just running a single cell, you'll get an error. So remember to do run all, and then you get a nice green correct. So yeah. Yeah, so Pandas, intro to machine learning, also in Kaggle, how models work, basic data exploration, building your first model. Let's click on basic data exploration. And surprise, surprise, it uses Pandas. So data exploration, interpreting the data, and then you start your exercise. So it's a similar thing. You kind of get you get some background info, then you do your exercise, then you save your progress. Okay, so whether you follow this channel because you're in business yourself, whether you're trying to learn code for educational purposes for your career, recurring coding. So from this, let's go and have a look at something which none of us can ignore, and that is the subject of machine learning and in brackets AI. They can often be confused, and we'll soon find out that there is a very clear difference, and we'll look at the difference, and also we will look at Peltarion. Okay, so if you're primarily interested in Python and web scraping, why are we looking at this? This website is called Peltarion, the company. And is it a strength, a weakness, opportunity, or threat to your career? Well, it's probably all of those. But if you consider, firstly, strengths, if you are good at web scraping, you can extract data. If you can extract data, then within an organization or for a client or for yourself, you can then pass it to an AI model, which can then process that information. So that's the strength. The weakness is ultimately, even web scraping is being simplified by AI. And if you've watched my video on Scraperstorm, back on 25th of December, you will see that that actually has some AI built into it, which simplifies web scraping. It's a software as a service, I believe it's called. So that's strength, weakness, opportunities. Yeah, so with AI, there is an immense requirement for large amounts of data. So if you can web scrape on a large scale, data extraction, web scrape, data mining, however you call it, then you will be in demand because you will be required to extract that data for someone to build their model with, or if you want to build the model. And threats, as I just said, the threat to you doing web scraping is potentially that an AI model could ultimately do something very similar. And once you've extracted a whole 60,000 images, for instance, I wonder why I said 60,000. If you're familiar with the MNIST database, it's got 60,000 numbers from 1 to 9, and they are used for training and then testing for handwritten digits. So yeah, we're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of images, of text, and let's go and have a look at it, shall we? So how it works. So here we can see engineer, data scientist, developer, team lead. Whether you're looking at this as a business person or actually as a coder, then all of this is going to be relevant to you. No code environment. So what is this? This essentially is threat. If you're having a career in data science or coding and AI and you think you're going to be writing the next version of TensorFlow or whatever, so no code. Pre-built and pre-trained networks ready to work from. Run one or many in parallel. Easily iterate, evaluate, and refine your models. If you've watched one of the good sources of videos I found on YouTube is actually from universities, quite often American universities, Washington, North Carolina, California, and so on. And one of the things that I saw on one of those videos was reference to the fact that if you use Google Colab, the GPU on there, the processing time is minutes, rather than if you try and use the CPU on your own laptop, PC or whatever, it could be hours. So where the computations are done is very important. So if you're going to be using AI, making your own models, then you do need to consider whether you're actually going to be running it yourself or whether you're going to be running it on Google Colab or paying for it as a service. The other good thing is you can just leave it running and then just go off, and if you're working from in a cafe, you don't need to worry about your battery running out on your laptop or whatever because you're training a model. And the numbers involved here are just run into millions and billions. So the more training you do on your model, the more accuracy you get. And yeah, one-click deployment. Build your first deep learning model within 10 minutes. And this one is image classifier API tester. So yeah, just like I was saying about the handwritten digits, it sees a handwritten digit and then the result is 4. So it's accurately, I suspect this is 99.99% accurate because it's the favorite one to do for demos. So here we've got tutorials and demos, use cases, AI handbook and blog. Before we go and look at any tutorials, just look at some use cases and sentiment analysis. For instance, if you're looking at, I know that's used for text and audio, and the meaning behind expression gives us a chance to improve product development and customer experience. Now, that was one thing which I was looking at, but I never got around to with my web scraping of newspaper sites and sentiment analysis of the news stories. If you're looking at sentiment analysis of news stories with financial websites, then obviously that could be an indicator of future share price movements and so on. Diagnostics. This is better decision support and patient elevated treatment. One of the examples, if you watch these tutorials, is how the accuracy is phenomenal of predicting future outcomes for radiography. And instead of a radiographer looking at some x-rays, this can look at thousands of case histories and more accurately predict a diagnosis and potentially spot something that a human, a radiographer, would not find. And obviously it's very expensive and takes a long time to train a radiographer. Predictive maintenance, so machine owners and operators can better understand patterns in order to move forward. So yeah, you don't want a machine breaking task automation. So yeah, you've heard of many of these things before. There's journey towards precision farming. Creating smart market research surveys with AI. So I'll let you read all those for yourself. So let's just before we wrap it up, let's just look at so yeah, there we see all the good usual things. The NLP, sentiment analysis, speech to text, text similarity. So that's often called text similarity. Okay, I thought that came under NLP, but yes, so you can have two sentences and none of the words or none of the significant words can be the same. The context of the sentence can be identical. Which is the biggest, so this is obviously how something like Google or a search engine would work. Which is the biggest animal in the world? And you've got these 5 other sentences which are all, the model actually knows that these have the similar meaning. So which is the biggest animal in the world? And 96% accuracy, what is the largest living organism in the world? So largest, biggest, living organism, animal. So there we go, the power of AI. And let's just have a look at, if I can find it, learn. Now this is what I want to kind of show you, because we've looked at Kaggle for beginners, deploy an operational AI model, getting started with a platform. Let's just have a look at this. So got a video walkthrough, and I'll shut up and we'll just watch this for a bit. Compute time 41 hours. Oh, 41 hours available. Now let's just pause that. If you're looking at using this service from a business point of view, that is one of the costs. And if you're using AWS or whatever, you're already familiar with paying for compute time. Now, if you try and run one of these experiments and you set too many epochs, epoch is one iteration of the training model. So the more times you iterate through the training model, the more accuracy you should get if all the weights are set up correctly. Now, if you have too many epochs, it will use up a lot of compute time, which will then cost you more money. So let's carry on. Takeover prediction, stock predict, fashion MNIST. So fashion MNIST is it's a ready-made database of photos and descriptions of clothing, and they've been classified as shoes, coats, sandals, sneakers. And if you look up MNIST or fashion MNIST, you can actually access that model from inside TensorFlow. I've not mentioned TensorFlow up till now. TensorFlow is Google's, it was released in 2015, I believe. Google's AI they've open sourced or made it accessible to all, and you can, as an API which you are using, an API called Keras, you can access that. And without going into too many details, because I'm not an expert myself, you can use TensorFlow with Keras, and it can load in the fashion MNIST database, which can then show you how to train the model and then test the model, and you can see how much accuracy your model has of identifying skirts, trousers, shoes, hats, coats, so on. So they're running through IMDb. If you're familiar with books to scrape, and probably the thing that you would then do after books to scrape would be attempt to web scrape IMDb. So good old IMDb. And here you can see it's very drag and drop. So you drop your data set. So potentially this is where your web scraped data would go. So you see how it all fits together. Past this and data library. So again, all of this data could be web scrape data. So IMDb tutorial data. So it's everything links to something else. And there we can see they're using BERT, which is, yeah, it's an engine which is used with sentiment analysis and NLP being natural language processing. So so this is the tutorial video, which is very good, and tutorials also here. And I was just looking for the overview, but I can't find it. But for intermediate users, Kaggle competition with zero code. Anyway, I think I've probably shown you enough to whet your appetite, but just consider whether this is a an opportunity or a threat to your career? And also just bear it in mind when you think, well, I can do web scraping and I can make money on Upwork and I'll always be able to do that. Maybe true, but bear in mind that with this, with AI, they often to help me. I bet that's probably a chatbot that's run by AI. What was I saying? So yes, consider when you're web scraping, you can just create a little CSV and that's your output, and then you make $50 or $100 or whatever. But going forwards, even web scraping is going to need to be done on a much larger scale if the client is paying for a service like this, for instance. And before we go, let's just look at the pricing. And yeah, hobby projects, $49 a month, creating your first commercial AI projects. So, I mean, for instance, if you were a property developer or real estate developer and you had lots of data on real estate that you'd web scraped, you could feed that into your model. You get 15 training hours per month, which, yeah, I don't know how quickly we'd use that. Quite quickly, I suspect. 3 live deployments, 3 experiments. So, yeah, I mean, compared to many things, I mean, nearly proxies, the cheapest web scraping, Scraper Storm was, I think, that much as well. So that's quite a common price for the sort of things which are being automated now. So, yeah, is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? I'll leave you with that. Feel free to comment, and yeah, have a good look around Peltarion. Okay, so if you're like me and you've done some demos and you've seen how they can classify written text, handwritten text into digits, then you may be thinking, well, that's all very well, but how do I actually use it? How do I use a model? And especially, how do I use it with Python? So, yeah, I just wanted to share this with you because it did confuse me for a while. So, Peltarion on GitHub, and there's a Jupyter notebook, which uses requests, NumPy, then it just requires the URL of that you find on the deployment view. So once you've built your model, you'll get a URL, and you'll also get a token. Once you have the URL and the token, then you can use this code, and then you can actually query it using your own images, and you can classify your own images, which is the whole point. So yeah, just thought I'd share this with you, because if you are going to be experimenting, trying this out, then really this is what it's all about. The theory's great, but if you want to actually test it with your own images, then this is what to follow. So I'll leave you with this link.